Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Two Sistas podcast. This is Mindset Monday, March 13. And of course, we are getting close to the Ides of March, which is on the 15th. And I don't know why I keep talking about that, but that's okay. So we have an amazing guest on today. And I just want to let everybody know, unfortunately, Carol Sue could not be with us here today, and we wish her safe travels. But we are going to hop right on into this because we have an amazing guest on. And sometimes when I do an introduction, I get very excited because, then all the questions start coming to me. But we're going to start out with the amazing introduction. I'm really inspired by our guest's story. So we want to welcome, of course, to the Two Sistas podcast, Lyn Delmastro-Thomson, and she is a certified hypnotist, energy entrepreneur, energy healer, and an entrepreneur. Welcome, Lyn. We are so excited to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here.
Wonderful. So, of course, Monday Mindset. And, I was mentioning to you just before we went live how, I felt a little, when the change of time happens, I feel a little off. But, hey, it's Monday morning. We are so excited to get everything going. Lyn, before we hop into your story, I want to go actually into the backdrop of your story, because I think it's really important for people to really hear your story in such a way. And I got to tell you, when I read your bio, I was like, wow, how could that have happened? So I cannot do your story justice, and I would love for you to share with our audience what I am referring to.
Okay. So my story starts when I was about 25 years old. I was scheduled for elective surgery. And so elective being, not something scary, serious. I was actually going in for a breast reduction. And what ended up happening was some pre-op blood work showed some abnormalities. And within about 2 weeks of lots of different medical tests, actually being hospitalized and then moved to a different hospital in a different city in the state I was living in, they ended up coming up with a diagnosis of leukemia.
Oh my goodness.
So I went from thinking, here I am, like a healthy 25-year-old woman, just, choosing this surgery that I had actually wanted since I was probably 16 or 17 years old, to coming out the other side with this like crazy life-changing diagnosis. And hearing the word leukemia, as probably anybody listening, that's a word that has a lot of impact, a diagnosis that has a lot of impact to your mind and to your life.
In more ways than one, because even though obviously I know your story now, but I'm hearing you explain it, and like my jaw just dropped, because how could that be?
Right. I know.
I mean, that is so crazy. Not only was it life-changing, but it changed your life in a very dramatic way, like such a major impact.
It certainly did. And, I lived actually, with the treatment for that for 3 years. Luckily, it wasn't like traditional chemotherapy, so I didn't have to go through that. It was more like chemo in a pill. And so I lived with, it still had the same side effect as traditional chemo. It was like a lot of nausea for sure. And I actually started, I was being told by the hematologist, they were monitoring blood work and saying, oh, it looks like this medication is working. Good news. And I was having a completely different lived experience, because I was watching as my body started like going from probably, could have lost 10, 15 pounds, and that would have been a good thing, to being extremely underweight. I just started like wasting away, and people would even say to me, like, don't lose any more weight. Like, friends and stuff, family members were all very worried. And I had a doctor who, I would go to these appointments and he would keep focusing on, oh, the lab tests, good news, good news. And I was like, but why do I feel worse? Because not only did I lose weight, I started feeling more fatigued. I started like physically just going into this decline. And he never really would answer my question. So I then went into this, 3-year period where I kept saying something doesn't feel right, but nobody was listening to me. It was like he would just basically, the craziest part of the story of these appointments was, he would say, well, how are you feeling? And I was not one to sugarcoat it. I would tell the truth. I was like, I don't feel well. I'm worried. Why am I losing weight? I'd tell him all these things. And his reply was the standard, like gaslighting really of, you look great, which was like complete lie when you look in the mirror and you look kind of like a human skeleton, or you look like you're on your way to death. How can somebody tell you you look great? It's like, excuse me, what? Why are you telling me this? It was just his way of like brushing me off.
Well, yes, he was brushing you off. He may have heard you, but he wasn't listening.
Exactly.
Okay, these labs look great, but my patient doesn't feel well.
Right. What's the evidence in front of me of the human being, telling me this? And just if he opened his eyes enough to look at like the progression of what I looked like over those months and years, really, like he would have been like, why is that happening? It doesn't make sense. It was just a case of, a doctor more interested in like a clinical, test, a lab result, than an actual human being sitting in front of him.
So, yeah, absolutely. So more clinical versus, my patient, she looked one way, she's still losing weight.
She's complaining, she feels worse. Yeah, she feels like crap, like she's exhausted all the time, like she's not doing well.
Something was not right with that. And obviously, I'm sure that it impacted your life in a way where you just never expected, like, what the hell is happening here? Like, what do I do? No one's
Exactly. And I kept actually asking my primary doctor to refer me to a different hematologist, because I was like, this doesn't feel right. Like, first, just the type of care I'm getting does not feel right. The way he's listening to me doesn't feel right. And then deep in my gut, something also just did not feel right about this. I felt like I was questioning, the math doesn't add up here,
In that regard. Now, was your primary listening to you?
He wasn't listening either, because he had gone to medical school with this specialist. And so he kept telling me every time I would question, and it was more than once, he said, well, he's the best in town. Like, we went to medical school together. Like, trust me, he's great. And I was like, if this, in my mind, I'm thinking, if this is the best in town, what the heck, like, this doesn't seem like right care. But he would not, how the medical system is. You need a referral to see a specialist so that your insurance will pay for it. And he wouldn't pull out his pad of paper and, give me that referral, despite me asking multiple times. So, and I was in my 20s. So like, the way I handled it then is much different than how I would handle something like that now. I just kind of would be like, oh, okay, a little bit defeated by what's happening.
So at what point did you have enough? In other words, there had to have been that pinpoint pivotal moment.
Yeah. So the pivotal moment actually came because my life circumstances started to change. So when this had happened, I was in graduate school. I was pursuing a PhD in history. So I thought I wanted to be a professor. And my insurance was actually through the student health insurance plan. And at that time, before we have, what we have now with the marketplace, I couldn't get any other insurance because, of course, you have a diagnosis of leukemia, who's going to want to take you on? And that wasn't considered creditable coverage. So I had to get myself to the place where I could go out. I was like somewhat stable enough that I could get a job. And so I get a job finally, like I got stable enough, and I think I got a job that allowed me to work like 32 hours and get insurance, which was a lot given my physical state. But I was like, I have to get out of this. Like, I have to get different insurance, get a different primary. So get a different primary. This is like 3 years into this whole journey. And I walk into that first appointment with the new primary, and I said, I really do not want to see this hematologist anymore. Like, can you refer me to somebody else? And she said, sure. So she pulls out her magic pad of paper, writes the referral, gives it to me. And I go within, a few weeks, they're able to get me into this new doctor. I bring in my stack of medical records. He starts reviewing it. And within 10 minutes of flipping through the papers, he questioned whether that was actually the correct diagnosis.
Holy smokes. He questions the diagnosis that you've been living with for 3 years.
Yes.
Doing the chemo, doing this, doing that, not feeling well, being gaslighted, losing weight, and you still feel like crap, and you're reporting this to your primary and to the other hematologist. WTF, I can't.
Yeah, it was, and I still can remember the wash of emotions that I felt in that moment of him saying, I'm not sure if this is the right diagnosis. I was like, finally, relief, like somebody is actually listening to me. And I was also super pissed because, again, like you said, it had been 3 years of living in a nightmare, basically. I was suffering physically, I was suffering emotionally and psychologically. Like my whole life was just kind of a shit show.
Yeah, it was a shit show. And I'm really sorry to say that, and very sorry that you had to go through all that. What happened at that point? Because I'm sure he must have ran his own type of tests.
Right. More tests. Yeah. Of course, for a diagnosis like that, they do bone marrow biopsy because that's what they need to actually look at. So, that was a process of, I think, a few weeks again to do all of the testing. And it comes back and he says, yeah, I don't think it ever was, what they said, chronic myelogenous leukemia. I think you've always had something else that they didn't pay attention to, and they started treating you for the wrong thing.
This is very puzzling and very troubling.
And it's, unfortunately, I've looked up statistics about misdiagnosis, and when you start looking at those numbers, I think it's like around 12 million people in the United States alone each year being misdiagnosed. Maybe not as scary as with leukemia, but still, 12 million people's lives are being impacted by medical misdiagnosis.
And I understand, I guess, to a certain point, why that may happen, but it to me, it's all in the connection, in the conversation with the prior physicians that nobody was listening. And I would think at that point, maybe they would have gone back to the drawing table, so to speak, and like figure out what is happening.
Right. And I actually had gone back in that time period, in that 3 years, because the doctor I was seeing wasn't the one who had made the final, diagnosis. I had that done at a major medical center in San Francisco at the time. So I actually traveled back up to San Francisco in that, I think it was maybe year 2. And I went up there and I'm questioning it. I'm like, why do I still feel like crap? And the most bizarre part of that experience was I walk into this appointment. I had been in that hospital associated with that medical facility for 10 days, I think, maybe even 2 weeks. And they had an empty file folder sitting on the doctor's desk. And she's like, why are you here? Can you tell me why you're here? And I'm like, you don't have my medical records? Like, what? Like, how do you not know anything about me if I've been in your hospital, a year or so ago? Like, you should have my records.
That is so bizarre. What was your explanation?
they really had no explanation. And basically it was like the whole appointment was like a catch up of like, well, here's what happened. And, this and this, like I was telling her the whole story. And then, of course they only have so much time. So by the time I'm done, like we're catching this doctor up. My parents were there too. And, both horrified what was going on. It was like, oh, okay, well, thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, it was pretty much like that. It was like, not like, well, let's try to extend your appointment, or let's get you, an appointment tomorrow so you can stay here and we can like talk about this. I was just brushed off. So, it was constant kind of mismanagement, gaslighting, being mistreated by the medical system.
Yes, it was. And I'm sure that really messed up your mindset horribly.
Very much so. I mean, actually, the year after I was diagnosed, I was kind of, like trying to navigate life. And then I had this other trauma happen in my life. So my best friend actually passed away very suddenly,
So
about
sorry.
18 months after I was diagnosed. And she died of a blood clot. And actually, what brought all of this kind of to the surface in my body was I had a blood clot that clotted off the veins that drained my liver. That was the initial thing that the surgeon, I think, was picking up in a, pre-op blood work, like something doesn't look right. I can't operate on you because there's something, wrong. So I went through this horrible like realization. At that point, I'm 26 and my friend was 26. We were 18 days apart. And I'm like, 26-year-olds can just die. Like, and that was, the sinking of, from like trying to keep my head above water to drowning, basically.
I can't even fathom that. I think it's such a travesty, and it just goes to show you, and as you mentioned too, as you're going through that, you were in your early 20s. And of course you would have handled it much differently now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, now it's like if somebody, when I do have to deal with the medical system, which I actually try to minimize having to go that route, because I really have I've seen behind the curtain of the flaws of that system. And, sometimes it is necessary, but I prefer other approaches. But I don't take no for an answer in those situations. It's like, you will give me a referral to a second opinion. You will do, like, this is my right. But, as a 25, 26-year-old, you're like, I don't know, is that okay? Can I say like, send me to someone else? I demand it.
Right, exactly. So now you find out that you were given the wrong diagnosis. Did they ever come up with a diagnosis?
Yes. Yeah. So, all of the tests that the second hematologist ran pointed in a different direction to a different type of blood disorder. So it's kind of like in the same family as chronic myelogenous leukemia, but not nearly as like serious or scary. It's kind of a slower effect on the blood, I would say. Okay. So it was like they had kind of the right general category, but a completely different approach was needed. Like it certainly was, if I had been being treated correctly for that, those 3 years would have gone much differently.
Well, sure. I mean, leukemia, what is there, like hundreds and hundreds of different forms of leukemia?
Right. Right. And, chronic myelogenous is not like the absolute worst, I would say, but it's definitely not a great diagnosis to get. And, and that medication was like brand new, developed within the past few years. So I've had people ask me over the years, like, what's the impact of taking that? It's like, who knows exactly? Obviously you don't want to take medications that you don't need for any reason.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not one to take medication, and I'm not an advocate for saying don't take your medicine. So I want to be perfectly clear about that. But, I have to, like, if I have a headache, like, do I really want to take that Advil? Like
Right.
I'm questioning myself, well, let me have a glass of water, let me do this. And then,
See if you can resolve it in some other way, because maybe
right.
there's some other reason, then, you just need to make it go away.
Well, it is Lent time and I did give up that second cup of coffee in the morning. So that could have something to do with it.
Yes, true.
So now you have an updated diagnosis, and I almost feel like you're just like restructuring your life or re-beginning your life, like all of that transpired. Like maybe you thought you were going this way, you're like, no, I'm headed this way.
Totally. Yeah. So kind of looking back when I was going through the initial part of it, I look back, on what was happening in my life at that time. Like I said, I was in grad school, I was pursuing a PhD, but I had been miserable for 3 years in that program. Like as soon as I started that program, I kind of felt like, wait, what am I doing here? Like, did I just make a huge mistake? But again, like in your 20s, you're kind of young, you're naive. And I kept telling myself, this comes back to the mindset piece. Oh, you are supposed to be suffering because you're in graduate school. You're supposed to be unhappy because you're in graduate school. Like I had some crazy beliefs at that time that justified why I stuck in that program for, those 3 years of, making excuses. And really it all came down on a deep level to a fear of saying, I don't know what I want to do with my life at like 22, 23. Like I don't have a map. And I always felt like, you have to kind of know what direction you're going. And so that was part of, I think, the journey for me too, in the beginning, was realizing I was just living my life in a way that wasn't really in alignment for me.
Definitely was not in alignment. That's just, how I'm kind of taking that, of course. So what we know what's transpired now. You're questioning the graduate school thing. Then what happened?
So kind of while I was in this 3-year limbo or nightmare, or however we want to call it, I started to actually explore other things. I started to explore other holistic approaches to feeling better, because when you're stuck dealing with, doctors who keep just telling you you look great and you don't, you're like, maybe I should start looking for some other people who might be able to help me, because nobody seems to hear me. So my journey kind of started there while I'm in the midst of this nightmare. And I started going first for something called biofeedback, where I was hooked up to these sensors on my body. And I could see on a computer screen, like what my heart rate was doing, what my breathing was doing. And the person I worked with would teach me, like, if you, breathe in a certain way, it actually, we think we have no control over what our heart is doing. No, we actually indirectly do through our breathing. So she started teaching me basically how to calm my nervous system down. And so I started to feel like this was like a step in empowerment, because I went from feeling completely out of control, like not knowing what to do, with my body. I was anxious. I think I was starting to get panic attacks in this time period, just because my life was a mess. And I started to learn, oh, I can calm myself down. And that was beneficial to, my process. And then after my friend died, I kind of had a mental health breakdown. So I started going to therapy, and the therapist said, there's this class called Yoga for Healing at the local yoga center. And I was like, yoga? Like, you want me to go to yoga? Because the only yoga I had ever seen in my life before had been when I'd gone to a gym. And I would see these people doing, things like headstands and, like very, rigorous postures. And I was like, sometimes I'm winded walking like from the couch to the bathroom. Like, what are you talking about? You want me to go to yoga and stand on my head? And she's like, no, this isn't like what you're picturing. Just give it a try. So I go to this class, and we spent most of the class lying on the floor with like blankets and bolsters under our bodies, just like breathe, a lot of very gentle movement, breathing. I was like, oh, this is different. And I feel better. Like these things started to help me, So I was like, at that point, I became kind of, I call it the yes woman of, holistic healing. People would go, have you ever seen an acupuncturist? And I would say, no, but do you know a good one? Or, have you tried Reiki? No, but do you know a practitioner? And I just started like trying anything that crossed my path that sounded interesting. Freeze. I don't know if it's me or her.
Lyn, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. It looked like we had a little freeze.
Yeah, we had a little, and it looks like my face is freeze, but actually here, let me just kind of refresh stuff here. Bear with me a moment. And this is the beauty of live podcasting. And by the way, just want to segue over because we have a lot of amazing listeners on the Wisdom audio app. And I want to thank you all for being here. I see some familiar names. They are so amazing.
Awesome.
I love the Wisdom audio app. So we got kind of caught up in where you were explaining about the yoga, and it seemed like you're like, okay, that sounds great, but all right, I'll try it.
Right.
And you really achieved a very beneficial health benefit, physiological.
Right.
But
and
also,
psychological too.
and psychological as well. So obviously I could see where you wanted to become an energy healer.
Yes. And actually, back when I started my business, I started it with these other two things that had helped me so much, with biofeedback, with yoga. And then it progressed into doing energy work from there. But there's a strong interconnection between all of the things that I had done for myself and kind of where my work has evolved to now.
And of course, adding to that, being a certified hypnotist.
Yes.
So just get a couple curious questions about that. Do you meet with your clients online, or how does that work?
Yeah, so all my clients actually are, all across the country and even a few international.
Wow.
And yeah, it's fun. I love when I get to work with people too in different parts of the world. So I work all, online. Sometimes when I do energy work, if the person is in the US, we do it just by phone, just because it's more relaxing than having to, like, if you're lying in bed trying to relax and have somebody stare at you on a camera, it's kind of not the most conducive. So I usually just work by phone in that sense, but I would do hypnosis over Zoom, and it's people ask, is that effective? Does it work? And it does.
Wow. How do I ask this? What is the most, in your opinion, and this is just the curious side
Sure.
of myself with being hypnotized, what is the most kind of odd thing that has ever happened to maybe one of your patients during a hypnotherapist session, where when they came out of it, they were sparked, or they felt energized? Like, what was the most amazing thing that maybe perhaps you've witnessed?
I think, some of the types of hypnosis sessions, we call them like healing hypnosis. So we can go back and revisit things in the past and heal those, or we can actually kind of have a conversational hypnosis where we talk to a part of you that may be creating sabotage in your life, or, blocking your progress. So I think those are some of the most impactful for a lot of people, because it's like we can go back and revisit, and where you get taken by your subconscious mind, you might think, oh, I'm going to go revisit this memory, and it's actually something much different, because that's where you really need to go.
Wow. I'm thinking I may have to sign up for hypnotherapy. And I think that those type of modalities that can bring you that sense of calm, that sense of peace, to maybe understand something a little better.
Yes, for sure. And I actually, personally, I wrote one for myself because I had been at an event and I heard Dr. Bruce Lipton speaking. And he had shared about, how the first 7 years of our life, when we're children, it shapes a lot of our beliefs, our perceptions. And he was specifically talking about health in this. And it's like, what did you learn in the first 7 years of your life about your health and who takes care of it and about doctors? So I realized I had done like a ton of healing on my own in many other areas, but I had never explored that. And that for me was really fascinating when I wrote myself this hypnosis. And then I listened to, my own voice recorded to guide myself into this. What came up? Like I had memories of being like a little small child, and maybe like being sick with the flu or a cold and going to the doctor's office and, parents saying, it's okay, the doctor will make you feel better or he'll fix you. And I did some work to clear, that belief that it's somebody else that fixes you or heals you, because I didn't want that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine, and what you said right there, brings to the point that, obviously you were very young. And when you were talking about that, I was thinking about when I was, I don't know, 4 or 5, and I come down with impetigo. And that was not pleasant. So me going, like, I have a stigma with going to the doctors, and that's, I always go back to that. Well, this is what happened. Like that was a very traumatic experience as a young child. And of course, the other traumatic experience when I was a child was actually much younger, when my sister Carol Sue, who I co-host the TwoSistas with, I think I was about 2, so she was about 6. And we were playing in our parents' bedroom, and we were fighting over a toy, and she grabbed, it was an ice cream truck, little toy ice cream truck, and she threw it at me, and it like, yeah. So, and of course I never let her forget about that. But she's a wonderful sister. I love her to pieces. But, we always go, what you were saying about Dr. Lipton and how like the first 7 years of your life, I still, those memories come up.
Right. And that's, he talks about, and this is kind of a brain-based thing, like what happens in those first 7 years is we're kind of like sponges, and we're also developing our beliefs and, our framework for how we understand the world. So it's a very malleable time. And I think everybody probably has some stuff from that time period that, we don't usually look at. And the fascinating thing too, for me, was I don't have a lot of memories from that, early childhood. Like some people, you can say, what happened when you were 3? And I have clients that are like, they can tell me a whole story. And I'm like, wow, you remember that? I don't remember anything from when I was 3, but under hypnosis, I could remember those things. Like they kind of just came up to the surface for me. And it was interesting.
Wow. Yeah. Very interesting for sure. My gosh. Lyn, do you have time for maybe one of our listeners, excuse me, on wisdom to come up and maybe ask a question or, contribute to the conversation?
Sure.
So, hey, wisdom, welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. A lot of familiar names. Thank you. Thank you. So if you would like to come up and ask Lyn a question or contribute to the conversation, we have time for one person to come up on stage. Lyn, as we're waiting to see if someone will come up on stage with wisdom, your life story, where you are in this moment right now, through everything that you have been with, has brought you to this certain point. What is on the horizon for you? Because I see you doing huge things. Is there something?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Something in the works?
Yeah, so I'm actually in the process of creating some group programs to be able to support more women, because I work primarily with women in my work. So, there's a capacity, obviously, what I can do one-on-one in a week. And I know that I'm kind of outgrowing that ability to, help more people. So I'm working on a 3-month group program, which is all about unlocking your body's healing potential on its, its natural healing abilities.
Wow, that sounds so exciting.
I'm super excited to run it, and I've kind of created a method that I use a lot with my one-on-one clients, and kind of created a way to translate it to a group container.
Wow. Uh, I see such great value in that, because I think when you're in a group program too, the different participants in that amazing course or group coaching that you are going to do will benefit so much from each other's stories.
I think so. Yeah. I think having, the ability to also share and support one another, and boost each other up too. Cause, obviously part of it is like keeping yourself in that positive space. So it's like being able to come in and say, when you're having a down day, like, hey, everybody, I'm struggling a little today, and having people kind of lift you and cheer you on and help you work through what you need to work through.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say as far as mindset goes? Because obviously you've worked very hard to shift your mindset. Do you have some strategies? And you had mentioned the yoga with the breathing.
Mhm.
In your opinion, what has worked out very well for your clients? Like, what could be one strategy that if one is feeling stressed, that they can kind of, implement a simple strategy?
Yeah. So I think sometimes looking at, since we're talking about, mindset and beliefs, looking at what you're thinking about the situation that you're going through. So, we all have things that stress us out, whether that's family, work, whatever you're dealing with. And if you can, spend a little bit of time thinking, well, what is this really bringing up for me? Instead of just kind of being like, I'm triggered, I'm upset, but what does this represent for me? What am I really feeling on a deep level? And one of my favorite questions I love to ask clients is, what am I making this mean? Or what are you making this mean about yourself, about the world? So that's a great question to ask when you're, stressed out and triggered, is like, what am I making this mean about me, about how I see the world, and journal on that. I think that's a great way to start to kind of do a little detective work for yourself.
That is so true, because I think the journaling aspect of it, and when I was going through my certified health coaching course through IIN, Institute of Integrative Nutrition, I don't remember the person's name, but she referred to journaling as morning papers.
Mhm.
And I think of morning papers and journaling like just this major brain dump, like just let it flow. And there's so much to, pen to paper, pencil to paper, whatever you use, where you can really look back at what you wrote and say, oh, okay, I see a pattern here, or I see a pattern of thinking, or, whatever it may be. And it can be very therapeutic and very enlightening.
Yes, I think so. That's certainly working more at the conscious level, but if you spend enough time, you'll dig deeper into what's going on. It may not always be the first thought that you have of like, oh, well, this is because of, this situation. If you dig deeper, it probably has a deeper root. Maybe it's triggering something way from your past. I had something yesterday actually trigger a little something for me, and I was on a walk and I was like, what is this really triggering for me? Like, what am I making this mean? That this person responded to me in a certain way. And it was like, yeah, this really does go back to, an old childhood wound of, this was how I was treated by somebody else as a child. And there's still, layers that hurt around that, even years later, with a lot of healing.
That is so true. So Lyn, how can our viewers and listeners connect with you further?
Yeah, so one of the best ways is to just find my website, which is heartfirehealingllc.com. And you can also find me on Instagram at heartfirehealing.
Wonderful. And of course, I will make sure that all of your information, social media and whatnot, is in the show notes. So
Yes.
make it easier for people to connect with you further. I am so grateful for this opportunity. with you spending your time on this Mindset Monday on Two Sistas to really chat about mindset, but in such a different way from your story of where you were and how you worked through all that, which, you were in that fork in the road and, you took that right fork and, or maybe it was left, whatever it was, but you did it. And I just think that is so empowering and so enlightening. And I am so excited for you to see, where your group coaching program goes. Ooh, try spitting that out 3 times fast. Got a little tongue tied there.
Yes.
So
and it'll
thank you.
include hypnosis in it as well. So if people are curious, they get to experience hypnosis as part of the group program. So
This sounds very interesting. Well, on that note, thank you again, Lyn, for being here. And I hope you will definitely consider coming back again and visiting us real soon.
Yes, for sure.
Wonderful. Everyone, this is Mindset Monday, March 13th. Take that time out for yourself and really think about your journey, where you are today, and how maybe shifting your mindset or taking that fork in the road, where that may lead you, because you just never know. My name is Janice, the co-host of Two Sistas and AKA Wellness Diva 5.0. And again, Carol Sue could not be here today, and she is the Naughty Boss. We shall see you again real soon. And remember, empower yourself with your mindset. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day, and we'll see you real soon.